around this document, which is really kind of trying to take our vision for learning to a reality and put it into a comprehensive way of looking at how we design learning, how we assess the level of performance that a student may have met, and what kind of interventions and supports we might need to offer, as well as a rating scale, which i.e. is rating. And so January will be a deeper conversation about grading practices. But the build-up last month, we started looking at what are competencies. We had some conversation with teachers. We talked about Marzano, which is really how we ask questions and trying to get to a deeper level of thinking in the way that we ask and frame learning experiences as well as questions. And tonight, we're really excited to talk about kind of like the big picture landscape of kind of learning on a more national level, as well as learning in parts of New Hampshire. Really kind of circling back to that work around Marzano, and having a chance to kind of look at what quality schools and quality learning practices look like, what the research says, and how that ties to what we are trying to do. Then we'll actually have a chance to move and look at a progression of learning, which really is for instruction. So moving from teacher-centered lessons to more learner-centered lessons, and how that looks and what that progression looks like. So that will be one session. Another session is going to talk about personal competencies. Personal competencies, you're looking at those, what sometimes people have called soft skills. Sometimes in industry you'll hear soft skills, time management, organization, collaboration, communication, those pieces. But those really, what you have through research and what industry will say, those are essentially important for one's success. And so what we are trying to do is help students develop that skill set as well as the content skills that we are working on. But really those skills that can transfer to any aspect of your life. Learning, work, managing your home, all those pieces. Those are the things, that perseverance. When things get tough, how do you persevere through it? So we are going to have a chance to engage in that, as well as we do have a chance to share with you at the end of the last session. We had people share on an index card, what did you like? What's a wonder you have? So we've taken those wonders and we have kind of grouped them together because there were similar wonders, and with some responses to those wonders, as well as we have some research on some of the questions people posed that we hope would be helpful. And then we will kind of have a chance to ask again, what are your wonders from tonight? So that we can kind of keep that conversation going. The session in January, as I said, we will be looking at grading practices in grading. We are working hopefully to try to get some college admissions folks. We had done a few years back, we had a panel of college admissions folks come and talk, and we are trying to put a similar type of panel together, because I think that's a really helps broaden the conversation. So thank you for being here tonight. Thanks for opening your minds to some learning and to talking about learning. And I'm going to turn things over to Brian Stack, who is helping to facilitate our conversations. Mr. Stack is an incredibly accomplished educator. He is principal of Sanborn Regional High School, 2017 Principal of the Year.
Yeah.
Did I get the year right?
You did.
He has written a book, PLC's, how do you look the name?
Breaking with Tradition.
Professional Learning Communities.
At work, yes.
Okay. He has presented at the national level. He has presented throughout the state of New Hampshire. He is an incredible educator. We feel very fortunate to have this opportunity to work with Brian, and for him to come and share his knowledge and skill set and his passion for redesigning and rethinking about learning. And so I turn things over to Mr. Stack.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. Just a couple logistics. I am going to use the mic tonight, which seems a little odd because you're so close to me, but more because we are recording tonight with the hope of putting that on cable access TV, right? So hope everybody's okay with that. I'll move around a little bit, but not too much for the camera folks. It would be, if somebody could get, I think it would be good to get people index cards earlier so that if they think about their wonders and their likes throughout the, if you don't mind, that would be great. So we'll get you some index cards in a little bit. So I've got a little bit of time to kind of kick things off with you, and Mary and I and Erica, we talked about 1,000 different things that I could talk to you about tonight, and I'm not going to do 1,000 because I would just fill your head too much. I'm going to do 900 instead. Sound good? No, but I am going to touch upon a lot of things. My goal tonight is to kind of strike a chord with you, something. I want something to resonate with you, and I want you to start the process of being able to connect dots. Because as you're learning more about what's happening here at Interlace, you're going to start to draw your own picture and conclusions and ideas of where you think things need to go, and you need as many dots, as much information to do that. Just by a show of hands quickly, how many of you work for Interlace as an educator or school administrator? Just raise your hand. How many of you have children who attend schools at Interlace? Some of you do. How many of you are elected officials, school board members, etc.? How many of you actually attend schools here at Interlace? All right, I just wanted to make sure. Oh, two. All right, two. Fantastic. That's great. All right. And then others.
Yeah, I was going to say there's others.
We have another category that you are community members very interested in being involved in the discussion. How many of you qualify there? People you can raise your hand more than once. You're all interested. That's why you're here tonight, which is great. All right, you're all here, and I want to really, really focus us in on some of the most important things. So Simon Sinek writes a lot of books for leaders to help them focus their work, right? And I love this image right here, because so often when we think about things that we need to do, we focus right in on what we need to do and how we're going to do it, but we forget sometimes the most important thing is the why. And I'm very guilty of this as a principal, as a dad. I'm guilty of someone will bring me a problem in my school, and I immediately want to try to help them solve the problem. And I'm so far down the road of trying to figure out a solution to the problem and how we're going to get there that sometimes people will stop me and say, Brian, this is great, I'm glad you're helping problem solve, but can we just take a few minutes to think about why we're actually doing this and how this is going to be important? So I want you to keep that in mind with everything that you do tonight, because the what and the how, those things could get filled in later, but we've got to start with the why. And one of the things that Simon says is that all organizations start with the why, but only the great ones keep their why clear year after year. And I never want you guys to lose sight of why you're going to do any of the things that you're going to decide to do here. Because one of the great things about this process that you're setting up here is it's very collaborative. You're asking for a lot of input. You're all going to be involved in the decision. Now, some of the decisions that may be made along the way, you individually may not agree with every single part of every single decision, but as a group, you're going to reach consensus on what you believe is right, and you're always going to want to revisit that why. So that's just something in general to keep in mind. Now, my why always starts right back at home. These are my 5 kids. This picture is actually a year old now, because all of my kids look a little bit older, especially the one in the maroon hat, who's now 14, and he actually sprouted up to over 6 feet. But the reason I show this is because my wife's an educator, I'm an educator, we have 5 children in the schools. We don't live in the school district where I work, where I've done a lot of work around personalized learning. We live in the district where we grew up. We live in the neighborhood that I grew up in. My parents are a stone's throw away from us, and we need that with this big crew here. But my wife and I, on a daily basis, watch some of the struggles that our kids come home with from their school district, which hasn't made the shift yet. All right, they're working on it just like you, and great things are going to be coming, but we see some of those daily battles that they face at their different levels as we find that school isn't always working for them but they're trying to fit in and work for school, and it's not always making sense. And it especially becomes obvious with some of our older kids. This one right here, the one in the maroon hat, gives me a run for my money every day because he's kind of figured out the game of school, and it's not necessarily the game that we want him to figure out. You know, do all these things, check all these boxes, hopefully you'll get a good grade out of it, but let's figure out the quickest, easiest way to do that so that we can go have fun and do the things we want to do. And he's not learning things at deep levels, and it becomes frustrating to my wife and I. And so the whole, my why focuses around seeing how school can look different for my own children. And so anything that I do, I try to make sure if it's good enough for my own kids, it's something I'm going to stand behind. So all of the things I'll talk to you about tonight are most definitely things that would be good enough for my children, and I'm starting to see evidence of their school district taking those steps, just like you are, which is pretty fantastic. So I want you to think, did you guys ever have Blockbuster videos up this way? Who didn't, right? So I want you to imagine something about Blockbuster video, all right? Now, Blockbuster video rose to fame in the 80s, even the 90s a little bit. The students here are probably thinking like, yeah, I know nothing about Blockbuster video, but see, here's the thing. Back in the day, on a Friday night or a Saturday night, if you wanted to watch a good movie, you had to go down to the Blockbuster video and rent it and hope that they had enough titles for you. Because if it was new movie, they had more titles. But if it was something that was a couple years old, it was like one. So you wanted to be that one person that got it, right? That was the model that existed. And you know what? Blockbuster owned the market. They owned the home entertainment industry. Now, believe it or not, Blockbuster video didn't hit their peak, their financial peak, until 2004. Okay, that seems, why would I need to know that? Well, here's a little known fact about Blockbuster video. In the year 2000, 4 years before they even hit their peak, they had an opportunity to purchase a little known company called Netflix. And they didn't do it. Now that's fact. Here's what's not fact. I surmise, I'm the CEO of Blockbuster Video, and I'm thinking, why on earth would I want to purchase something like Netflix? They have a very different model that doesn't seem to make any sense. Our model is tried and true. Customers are going to love coming into our store and actually holding their video that they're going to take home that night and watch. Why would they want to? Because at the time, Netflix, their model was mail order. You would request the movie you want, and then a day or two later, you get a little red envelope that had the movie in it. Why would people want to do that? So they didn't purchase this company. They kept doing what they were doing, and you know what? They did it successfully for another few years. But what they didn't have the forethought to see was that times were changing, that something was going to shift and make that market change. And what happened was streaming technology got better and better, and nimble Netflix jumped right on that bandwagon. And almost overnight, we were in a point where nobody was going to the video store to rent a movie. Nobody was requesting it by mail. Everybody was getting it streaming. And Netflix, all of a sudden, took over the market. And by the time Blockbuster Video decided they wanted to get in the game, there wasn't any room left for them to be in the game. And Blockbuster died a slow death. By 2010, they were virtually gone. I think there might be one left, independently owned, right, in Alaska. So don't let opportunity pass you by, right? So think about how that connects to our schools. If you see that something, maybe it's working great right now, but if you can see, map this forward and say, I'm not so sure if that's going to make sense to do that in a few years, it's something you've got to be looking at now. That's my only point with telling you that. And something else I'm going to point out here. We all go through this process when we have to make change. Change is difficult, right? When I started making change in my school district, we all read a book by John Cotter called Our Iceberg is Melting. Now, John Cotter, he wrote that book as a fable, but he wrote that book to explain his change process approach to the business world. And you can map it to any kind of organization, but John Carter wrote this book about penguins. And it was this fable where you had this one lonely penguin one day who was very astute, swimming around under their little iceberg that they lived on, and he noticed that the iceberg was starting to crack. And he noticed that this isn't good, that the crack is getting bigger. And he projected, just like Netflix might project, I don't know if our iceberg's going to be here in a couple of years. That's a problem. If we don't figure something out, we're going to be in trouble. And this penguin had to go through the process to help his community figure out what they were going to do. And so what that book was doing was kind of explaining what Carter's process was, right? We spend time establishing urgency, which I think you guys have been doing really well here. Like really questioning, how do we approach learning at Interlace? And is it working for us? And is it gonna work for us moving forward? And then you start creating a guiding team. I think it's safe to say all of you serve some role as a guiding team, as people who are helping figure out where this needs to go. And Mary's team of administrators and teachers have been working on that, developing visions and strategies, right? Just like you guys have been doing with the school board. And then here we are, step 4, tonight, communicating and understanding and creating buy-in so that people can understand the why. Why are we doing all this? So that the other steps kind of fall into place. Now you can start to empower others to be a part of this movement and to act and to make decisions, because you can't just have one person leading this charge. You got to get everybody up to speed and then give people some latitude to interpret. What is that going to look like in Sandwich? What is that going to look like in Meredith? What is that going to look like at the high school level versus at the elementary school level? What makes sense? And over time, you'll start to produce some short-term wins, and you want to celebrate some of those early victories, right? Because that's going to give you the momentum that you need to produce more change. But ultimately, what you want to get to is creating a new culture where all of the work that you're doing isn't a new idea anymore. It's just who you are and what you do. And that's what really great organizations do. And in the business world, they got to do it fast, right? If Blockbuster Video was going to try to pull this off, they got to work fast because time is money there. And you know what? Here, we also have to work fast. It's not because time is money. It's because we have students who are on the clock, right? You're a junior? You're a senior. The clock is ticking for you. You've got months. You're down to the wire. You've got a year in months, right? So that's something we have to keep in mind. Time marches quickly, folks, right? I'm going to take you back to 2012. And you're looking at a map of states in the United States that had policies that would support personalized learning models, competency-based learning models like you're looking at here. Now, red states were really advanced. They had policies in place that made this work very easy to do for local school districts. And then you had green, they were developing states, and you had yellow, orange, whatever color that's showing up as. They're emerging states, they're just starting. Now, Erica and I first started doing work together, right, down in Washington, D.C. back in about 2012, right? So no surprise, New Hampshire's been red for quite some time. As a state, we've had the policies in place to be able to do this work, which is great. It's also local control, which means local towns have that ability to jump in and really make it their own. Now, I'm going to show you the same map from just this past May, 2019. Look at the difference. I'll go back and forth, right? Red, really advanced. Yellow, green is getting there. Yellow, just starting. White, not doing anything. Amazing to see the transformation over 7 years. It's a research-based process that a lot of states are buying into. I have no idea what's happening in Wyoming. We'll leave that alone for now. But you see my point. We're making progress. This is not a New Hampshire thing or a New England thing. This very much is something that a lot of states are working on and working on quickly. Now, let's talk a little bit, just for a minute, about some schools that are doing some work. So first of all, conveniently, the Patriots won last night. Thank goodness. And people are like, why is there something that looks like a Patriots logo here? Well, all right, this is Adlai Stevenson High School. Adlai Stevenson is a leader in evidence-based grading. That sounds like it's going to be a topic for our next meeting. I put their old logo because I just found it a little comical that the students of Adlai Stevenson last year wanted to revolt, and they went to their administration because they felt like their mascot was plagiarized. I would say so. So they moved to the S. But Adlai Stevenson has been doing a lot of work with evidence-based grading and what we would call competency-based grading. They may call it something a little different. Well, actually, they do call it competency-based grading. So you can see right here from their website, they talk about they want to have an approach that is, it's growth mindset, it's competency-based, it promotes personal efficacy, belief in confidence that one's competencies will lead to the achievement of goals, right? Mary talked about that a little bit today. It talks about using a competency-based grading system where teachers will collect, monitor, and review student-produced evidence. So again, you produce evidence that gets judged to determine at what level, to what degree you've learned something. So this is happening in Illinois. That's one example. Let's switch gears to good old New Hampshire. Sauhegan High School, not too far from here, a little southwest, right? Sauhegan High School is a member of the Coalition of Essential Schools. They've been this way ever since they formed 20-ish years ago now. It's been a little while, right? Sauhegan High School is one of the founding members of PACE. And I talked a little bit at our last meeting about PACE, which is that alternate accountability testing opportunity where teachers create performance tasks that students are able to do in lieu of some kind of a standardized test. Now, there are 10 common principles of the Coalition of Schools, and we're not going to go through all of these, but I want you to hone in on some of these first ones right here. These sound really good. These sound a lot like things you guys are making your own. A focus on helping young people learn to use their minds well. A school goal that each student master a limited number of essential skills and area of knowledge. School practice tailor-made to meet the needs of every group or class of students. And teaching and learning that is personalized to the maximum feasible extent. Those are very generic principles that all Coalition of Essential Schools follow, and Sauhegan has been working very hard and evolving in their model over the last 20 years in their efforts to do that, and to interpret, in many ways, some of the same things that are coming up in your plan that you're working on here. Here's another one from far away, further away, Shelby County, Kentucky, just outside Louisville. Big school district, about 100 times this school district, all right? A lot of schools over a vast area, a little urban, mostly suburban, a lot of rural. You can drive for hours in Shelby County and see nothing but farmland and cows. Actually, very similar to my drive up to Sandwich. Just take away some of the beautiful autumn trees. But Shelby County, Kentucky, has been working on their own personalized learning model. All right, this comes right out of their strategic plan. For Shelby County, thinking big in all of their schools with so much variety and so many different needs, they're looking at personalized learning, student-owned learning, competency-based learning, anytime, anywhere learning, because they know that that's going to lead to student-centered learning, right? They want a model of learning that works for students. And their approach in Shelby County is to say, let's start with the student in mind and what their needs are, and let's do whatever we can to tailor our schools to meet that need. It's a paradigm shift, Because for many years in our schools, we start the other way. We say, look, this is what we think kids need. Now it's their job to rise up to do that and to be that. Well, that's not how they start in a place like Shelby County. They start with the students in mind and say, what do we need to do as a school to adapt to meet every student's needs? And your needs, I'm not picking, well, I am picking on you, because you're a student. Your needs might be different than your needs, right? So that's important, and that's been the Shelby County way for some time. And you can do a little more research in what their approach is, but they're also going through this process with you a few years ahead, perhaps in some ways, but not so much in others. All right, I'd like you to take just a second. I want you to turn to an elbow partner, and I want you to talk about what resonated with you with commonalities that these schools I just talked to you about have with Interlace right now, and also what are some obvious differences you notice. So just talk for just a second. All right, I'm going to pull you back together now. I want you to hold your thoughts, all right, because you're going to have some more time for some dialogue this evening. And I just wanted you to take a second to get to dipstick with an elbow partner about what they were thinking here. Now, this is more of a reminder. How many of you were here for the last meeting that we did in September? Almost all of you, but not all of you, and I can't pull the people that are going to watch this later on video. So, for the purposes of getting everybody on the same page, I want to remind everybody that Interlace has set aside some design principles. The things that are outlined here that are guiding the work at Interlace. So just so that we're all on the same page, there's a statement that talks about having competencies that create knowledge through application, that are very explicit, measurable, transferable. All right, so those take care of our first two bullets. There's a bullet that talks about assessment, and that was something that was a focus of our last session, and it's going to come up again tonight as we talk about assessment in different lenses. There's a bullet that talks about how you support students. If you're going to make any changes to your model, how are you going to support students? The same way that Netflix had to think about how they were going to support their customers, different from the Blockbuster model. And it has to be different, right? There's no brick and mortar store that you go to where Joe is working behind the counter and you know Joe and you've known him for a long time. So it's got to be different. And then there's a bullet that talks about advancing upon mastery of outcomes. So this idea of having a move when ready model, that's probably the one that sometimes scares people the most. It's okay to say that, because it's probably the concept that might be the most difficult to wrap your head around, the most different from things that you might do right now today, and the one that requires some of the most planning. That's okay. So those are the concepts, those are the design principles that you have outlined in your plan at Interlace. You are accredited by NEASC, right? The New England Association of Schools and Colleges. When was your last NEASC accreditation? 8 years ago. So you are 2 years away from entering the fund that is reaccreditation, right? All right, well, something that I would like to point out about accreditation. So they have principles of effective practice. There are a lot of things that schools are asked to be doing within the realm of being considered up to par for accreditation. So what I went to is I actually went to the NEASC standards, specifically the second one, because I think a lot of the things that you're talking about in your plan actually dovetail really well with that second standard for NEASC, and that second standard is broken out into different pieces that all encompass student learning. All right, so these are not my ideas. These are directly from some of the boxes you will need to check when you go through your NEASC accreditation process in a couple of years, and you need to show evidence that you're either doing these things or you have a plan in place to do these things. So much like we need to ask our students, we have standards that must be met. You have to show us the evidence that you have met or exceeded or have a plan to meet or exceed some of these standards. So I'm not going to read all of them for you, but let's just point out 2.3, for example. You have a curriculum that ensures that learners demonstrate a depth of understanding over a breadth of knowledge. In other words, do we want them regurgitating facts and figures, or do we want them being able to take a concept and transfer it, apply it to a new situation? That's something that I hear you guys talking a lot about in your plan. How about one more, 2.6? Learners regularly is the key there, engage in inquiry, problem solving, and higher order thinking skills. Now, I will tell you, when I was a high school math teacher in Massachusetts, very affluent community, I might add, like 99.9% acceptance rate into college, where, I mean, very, very different atmosphere from where I work now. But I'll tell you what, I did a horrible job at engaging my kids regularly in those skills, because that was always like the last question on the math test. There were 99 questions before that were really simple, and then I would ask them one of those. I didn't do that regularly. I did a poor job as a teacher back then, and I've learned a lot over those years. You're studying, or your administration team, at the very least, if I'm correct, is studying some of Marzano's work. Is that true, Mary?
We are working on it.
Are you reading this book?
So we are in the process of getting that up and running.
All right, so I want you to think, so Marzano is one of the biggest researchers in education, right? You can't argue with someone who's going to look at data and use data to make a determination about what's happening and what should happen. I got a math degree. I can't argue with anyone who's going to use data to make a decision. So Marzano talks a lot about this idea of having a high reliability school. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about a high reliability school. Actually, I should have flipped these slides. I'm actually going to flip them. I'm making a game time decision here. There's a high reliability organization. All right, these exist now, and these are organizations for which failure is not an option. Great example, I live about less than 10 miles away from Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant. That is most definitely a high reliability organization. My next door neighbor is the safety inspector there. Talk about a stressful job, right? Because one little mistake, they have to figure that out fast, because you can't afford to let that literally blow up, right? So, airplane maintenance teams, definitely no room for error. Air traffic control, prison confinement systems, auto manufacturing. We can think of lots of examples of high reliability organizations that focus on eliminating errors by addressing them right away. Now, unfortunately, in schools, there seems to be only 2 times that all schools are definitely high reliability, or should be. It's busing kids and feeding kids. We get really good at those 2 things, but we don't always focus on some of the other things, like, learning, right? That should be number 1. So what Marzano did is Marzano said, how can we take those ideas of what a high reliability organization would do and map them into a school? And that's the book that your administrators here are starting to look at. Well, not that I want to give away everything that Marzano does, but basically what Marzano says is, okay, you got to do this in stages. And that first stage is going to be creating a safe, supportive, collaborative culture, right? Which I would argue you've started doing that, because we've got representation from a lot of different stakeholder groups here, right? And then you move into having effective teaching. Hello, that's what we're here for, That's what we want our teachers to do. They know the kids best. We want them to be able to do what they do and be effective. We need a guaranteed and viable curriculum because we need to make sure that whatever is happening here at Sandwich maps to what's going to happen in a different elementary school in a district, right? Because those kids are still going to be coming to Interlace High School. Then we need to make sure that the curriculum is guaranteed regardless of which teacher they have, regardless of what school they're in. And if you're going to think that way, you need to start thinking about reporting on standards. All right, we got my kids' test scores in the mail yesterday. They do STAR testing. Right? What do we care about? We want to know how they're doing on the individual standards that they're working on, particularly my first grader, who's working on his literacy skills, and that STAR report came back, and I was very worried because I said, his scores do not look good, but I think he's reading well at home. What are we missing? We don't want him to fall behind. We care very deeply about some of that nitty-gritty, and in a high-reliability school, you care about that all the way through. And when you get to that last level, a competency-based education, that piece is helping guarantee that all of these other pieces are working together. Because remember, that key is that the organization can respond when it senses an error quickly to try to address it. Because in our system, you didn't design your system to help the Interlace student that wants to learn. Right? You're designing your system to help every student learn. Failure is not an option. Every single one of your students, your parents in this community, are sending you their best and their brightest every single day. And it's our job as a community to make sure that we help them find success, whatever that's going to look like at any cost. That's part of the work that you're doing here. Now, I showed this slide last time, so I won't draw a ton of attention to it, but at Interlace, you've already started to make a crosswalk between Marzano's taxonomy and what you're going to use as your proficiency language in your efforts to help students or help parents and students understand to what degree they've actually learned something, right? So this movement from developing proficiency all the way through to proficiency with distinction, being able to go above and beyond, right? So Marzano kind of talks about his taxonomy and what rigor starts to look like, and actually, great example here that talks about a flower. So you can start at the very highest level if you want students to understand this particular skill. It starts by saying very basically, well, can you list all the different parts of a flower? That would be like a level 1 kind of question that you might assess students on. And then moving to the next level, imagining or getting the students to imagine they're a part of the flower and what is their role, right? So now they're at a slightly deeper level of learning and showing evidence that they understand this concept in a new way, right? Versus a level 3. So now they're mapping this one step further. Now you're an insect landing on the flower. What do you do for the flower, right? And moving to that 4th level, consider other ways in which flowers might be pollinated and describe how that process might work. Include important parts of the flower. When we started our work at my school, I had my teachers take the assessments that they give every day, had been given perhaps for years, or at least for months, and they started mapping out to what degree they were assessing their students at. And surprisingly, most of my teachers, when they did that, would find that they weren't really leaving level 2. They would occasionally touch upon level 3, but they needed to go deeper with their questioning and what they were asking of students. So this idea of rigor can be a very concrete thing. It's not make the kids work faster and louder. It's really about the depth to which they understand something. And that right there is the nuances of what your educators are working on. All right, so for the parents in the room, know this is where your teachers are going with all of the skills that are taught here at Interlace. It's an incredibly arduous task. I'm going to kind of gloss over this slide in the interest of time, but this slide talks a little bit about how you make the connection between competencies and a real-world skill like driving a car, right? We all drive, we can all learn how to drive a car. We all did learn how to drive a car successfully. You have driver's licenses? All right, the state gave you that license. You can drive in Sandwich. You can drive where I live in Plastow. You can drive in California. You actually can drive in England with that license, if you didn't know that, for a short period of time anyway. But the state of New Hampshire certifies that you've mastered a skill at a deep enough level to be able to not hurt yourself or others, right? So driver's education can be the ultimate form of a competency-based model, and I did this last time. I mapped out a skill like learning how to park a car in a variety of settings. That's a competency, all right? You learn different pieces of that competency when you learn how to parallel park a car or perpendicular park a car. And when you went to demonstrate, you went to the DMV, right? You got in a car with someone you don't know. They took you to somewhere, maybe you've been, maybe you haven't. You didn't know where they were going to take you. And then they said, okay, park the car, right? And then they watched to see how you would respond. Because even if they use the same parking lot, the conditions are always different. Your car is bigger or smaller. There's other cars around you. There's traffic on the street that day. They want to see how you respond because they want to see how you transfer your learning, right? That's what we're trying to do in a competency-based model. We're trying to teach you a skill and then see to what degree you can extend that skill, all right? Your teachers are building different learning tasks here. I call them performance tasks. I think you do as well, right? Yep. So these performance tasks are like learning how to drive a car. So when I talk to my teachers, I say, look, when you're building a task like this, you got to think about a lot of things, all right? And I'm not going to go through all these, but let's just take equitability. You've got to think about how you can design this task so that it's not biased, right? So I have this great example where one of my teachers said, all right, we're going to create this little activity that imagines kids go to the beach. Okay, we live in the seacoast area, but guess what? Not all kids have been to the beach. So if you start a task off by saying, imagine you're going to the beach, guess what? You've just biased against the kids who have never gone to the beach before. And when they try to do this assessment, their scores inherently may not be as good because they don't have this prior knowledge that others have. That's one example of something teachers think about when they're trying to create a performance task. When I talk with parents about this whole skill, I actually started my first conversation with parents. I did an activity called the chocolate chip cookie rubric, which I completely ripped off a wonderful researcher named Karen Hess. She does a lot of work with rigor, and this was her idea. She gave me this advice. There was this day, I had a big PTO meeting when we were talking about grading, and everybody was wondering, well, how does rubric-based grading work? We're used to A's and B's and C's and D's, and how are you going to measure all of these tasks using these rubrics? We need to convert them to something we know. So I said, well, let's have a meeting about it, and let's do it at a PTO meeting, and I'd like people to bring cookies, kind of like what you have out there. I love that. Mary's like, this will be a good segue. I'm getting cookies right now. Well, here was the down and dirty secret. I have some great PTO parents who made fantastic cookies, and I knew they would. So I let them bring their best of their best. And then I picked up some store-bought cookies that were, okay. And then I also purposely baked some that were burnt. And I did that on purpose. Because we spent the whole first 15 minutes of the meeting talking about what we liked or didn't like about the cookies that were in front of us. And then from there, I kind of led them to saying, well, what goes into a good cookie? How do you make a good cookie? How do you measure that it's a good cookie? And we started talking about how, well, a good cookie is one that you would want to eat, right? A great cookie happens when you are the one that have to make the cookies for a potluck because you make cookies better than anybody else. Those are the great cookies, right? An okay cookie might be one that you would eat if you really had a hankering for a cookie. I love that the cookies are getting passed out. This is great. And a poor cookie would be my burnt ones. Those are the ones you wouldn't touch. Well, you could dissect this a little further. and this is just kind of a play on this, but you can actually talk about how you would have an exemplary chocolate chip cookie and compare it based on the texture of it, the appearance of it, the taste of it, the contents of it, the smell of it. And you can map that skill out at different proficiency levels. And what that does for students, because when you have a rubric like this, you're very upfront with them. This is what we're looking for, right? So if it's a chocolate chip cookie, a student needs to know that if it's going to be on smell, and they got judged here, they know exactly what they need to do to get it to the next level. They may not know how to do it, but they can understand the process in their learning. And again, that's another important piece of this work. All right, so I'm getting ready to wrap up because I'm over time. I want to give time to other things. But Mary, you said make sure you get this stuff in. So I won't click on these right now, but we'll share this PowerPoint out. So if people want to click on some of these, they can. There are great examples of tasks out there that dissect the skill, that have a rubric tied to them so that you can help students measure their growth and are incredibly rigorous. All right, this example here is a 4th grade task. The kids, I think I mentioned it at my last session actually, 4th graders make a solar cooker. They actually make a solar cooker that has to cook something, and part of their grade is how well they were able to build that solar cooker and whether or not it was able to work, right? There's a lot that you can do. It's a very rich task, but it's a doable task, and it will bring in a lot of the different elements, the knowledge that you're trying to teach kids. This particular task, my high school students use it in 9th grade. It's the Palestinian-Israeli conflict task. And what they do is they actually have students role play being a Palestinian or an Israeli and connecting and trying to come together to create some sort of a treaty for how they would share common land. And they spend a lot of time helping students build up to being able to do this. They study case studies of people that were in the conflict on both sides. They help the students understand what it's like to live in this situation and then put their ideas into practice to come up with an original solution. Very rich, very robust. This example actually comes from Interlace. It's a high school science task, and it talks about moose, and it talks about carrying capacity in a community, and it helps students kind of understand that problem through the moose population, but also understand what's impacting environmentally the moose population and what they need to do to keep that population on the right track. This all goes back to analyzing a performance task cycle. This work is work that your teachers will be doing and are doing to some degree. It comes right from the Center for Collaborative Education in Boston. And basically your teachers are designing tasks. They're looking at the data that they produce from those tasks. They're using that to make adjustments to their instruction. And this cycle continues, all in the effort to improve student learning. Your teachers want to be very, very specific that that's their why, that's their goal, that's their end goal. So here we are again tonight. This is your 2nd event for those of you that made it to both of these. And as Mary pointed out, there's going to be 2 different sessions going on. I don't know if I have the rooms right or not. Maybe you're changing.
I think what we're going to do, because we're not a super large group, we're going to actually start off with a competency-based instruction learning progression in the upper multi-age classroom. So I think once you kind of wrap up, Brian, we'll take about like a 5-minute break. And then that classroom is just go out here, go down the hall to the left, and it's the classroom that's on your right. And Mr. Hilder will be helping to direct us.
You can't miss it. There's 2 doors down there. It's the only one that's open.
And I know I took a little more time. You told me it was okay.
Yes.
And I also recognize, I don't get to come up here and see you guys as much, so I wanted to give you some things to think about, because y'all will get to see lots from folks here. But as Mary suggested, and what we did last time, we'd like you to keep 2 things in mind. And you already have the index cards, so you can write them down throughout the rest of this evening something that you liked about what you experienced, something you're still wondering about. A like and a wonder are your goals, and maybe label the index cards. I think it would be obvious, but don't leave anything to question, right? Because someone might interpret your wonder as a like, and you want to make sure it gets categorized correctly, right? All right, so we're going to take a little bit of a break. Yes? Yes, I can. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Those questions be in the room,
So,
those asked.
so we have an opportunity to do a little bit more kind of some learning and some sharing, and then we will have some time to talk as well.
All you have to remember from this slide is you're trying to think of a like and a wonder.